Angron, also known as the Red Angel and originally as Angronius of Nuceria, Lord of the Red Sand, is the Primarch of the World Eaters. He was raised on the brutal world of Nuceria, fighting as a gladiator slave and having his aggression enhanced by surgical implants known as the Butcher's Nails. The only Primarch taken into service of the Emperor against his will, he fell to chaos during the Horus Heresy, afterwards becoming a Daemon Prince of Khorne. Savage and in a state of constant rage, he was nonetheless renowned for his battle prowess and alongside Leman Russ and Vulkan was considered one of the most physically powerful Primarchs. The Chaos emissary to Lorgar called him the Fighter. Biography. The Slave of Nuceria. During the scattering, the boy that would become known as Angron was thrown to the civilized world of Nuceria, far from terror. He plummeted into the icy mountains of that planet. Not long after, a slaver found him, surrounded with a scene of carnage. Surrounding the wounded young Primarch were the corpses of numerous Xenos. Imperial scholars would later theorize that they were Eldar who had foreseen the great bloodshed that Angron would cause and had tried unsuccessfully to stop him. After being enslaved and nursed back to health by the planet's ruling masters known as High Riders, Angron was brought to the planet's capital Deshar. Still a frightened young child, he was subsequently dumped into a pit consisting of a single ziggurat with hundreds of other slaves. Acid filled the pit, and to the cheers of the spectators, Angron was eventually forced to kill all around him, to stand upon the ziggurat's uppermost platform and survive. Shedding a tear for the last time, Angron was proclaimed a promising newcomer to Deshar's arena and given the name Angron Thulkra, meaning Child of the Mountain, and property of House Thulkra. After this, Angron became a famed gladiator known as the Unbeaten, becoming a fan favorite of Deshar and reaping many victories. The closest thing he had to a father during this time was the older gladiator Enamors, but after the duo managed to slay two berserk ogrins, his masters ordered the two to fight one another to the death. Angron refused, and the High Riders ordered that he undergo a psychosurgery known as the Butcher's Nails as punishment. Upon being equipped with the nails, Angron was loosed upon Enamors and killed him in a blind frenzy. When Angron regained his senses, the despair of this revelation caused him to unleash a bestial howl for days. The death of Enamors proved to be the last straw for Angron, and he led a slave revolt among his fellow gladiators. Gathering a great army of slaves, they fled into the mountains of the planet, where he lived for several years. The civilized city sent armies to destroy Angron, but none were able to oust the Primarch and met the same demise. Nonetheless, but it not to last, his forces had little to eat in the barren mountains and were exhausted from the constant battling. His fate seemed sealed when 7 well-equipped armies surrounded Angron and his starving forces. In desperation, Angron fed his trusted comrades his own blood to keep them alive. Just as the battle was about to begin, the Emperor of Mankind's fleet arrived in orbit over the planet. The Emperor teleported directly to Angron's camp with a few trusted Adeptus Custodes. The Emperor promised Angron a legion made in his image, limitless power, and lifetimes spent perfecting the art of conquest. But, to his surprise, Angron refused. He chose instead to die amongst his comrades while fighting his oppressors. Reluctantly, the Emperor returned to his flagship above. Yet just as the battle was about to begin, the Emperor teleported Angron against his will back up to the fleet. He could only watch in anguish as those he regarded as his brothers and comrades were quickly annihilated. In a rage, Angron killed one of the members of the Custodes which surrounded him, but was forced into a state of submission by the Emperor's psychic might. Angron angrily asked why the Emperor not intervened to save his comrades upon Nuceria's surface, but the Emperor dismissed the question as lacking vision. He was the Emperor and had his eyes set upon the galaxy, not a single tyrant battling a slave revolt. The Emperor expressed hope that Angron in time would learn to understand what he had done. Angron stated to the Emperor that he was meant to die upon Nuceria, and now but a ghost remains. The Emperor replied that a ghost would suffice for what he had planned for him. The Great Crusade. Before Angron could reply, he was teleported to a nearby vessel of the 12 Legion, the War Hounds. Angron initially refused to have anything to do with his legion, and when several captains tried to talk to him, he brutally killed them, as they had been ordered by the Emperor to not raise a hand against Angron. The dead included the acting legion commander, Gia. Eventually, Captain Khan of the 8th Assault Company managed to form a rapport with Angron, talking about the rituals of Angron's gladiators and the traditions of the War Hounds. Now convinced of their worthiness, Angron took full control over his legion, which he renamed the World Eaters, saying they would form new traditions together. However, in the early days of Angron's leadership, he still refused to acknowledge most of his sons, who could not survive the implantation of the butcher's nails. At one point, Angron simply abandoned his legion, hijacking a frigate and disappearing. After 2 years of searching, Khan was able to track him down to a feral world, where Angron lived like a savage, and revealed that he was simply seeking a foe that could put him out of his misery. Khan eventually convinced Angron to rejoin the Legion by reminding him that his Nucerian comrades would hate to see him in this state, and with the promise that he would try to lead the World Eaters to shed their weakness. Most infamously, Angron ordered that the World Eaters conquer their targeted worlds within 31 hours, a single Nucerian day, and the time he had scored his greatest victory upon the planet. The World Eaters consistently failed to capture worlds within this time limit, and each time Angron ordered decimation as punishment, forcing one of every 10 World Eaters to be killed by his other 9 brothers. After several of these episodes, Centurion Mago finally refused to again enact decimation after the Genna campaign. This caused Angron to be thrown into a raged frenzy, during which he murdered several nearby World Eaters until being subdued by his librarians. While Angron lay comatose and had his memories of Nuceria absorbed by the young Lexicanum Tessis, a crisis erupted across the Legion as Mago attempted to stop Garland Serlac from installing the perfected butcher's nails in all of the World Eaters. Mago's revolt came to its climax on Genna, where Khan slew the rebel Centurion while Angron slew Tessis. Now at the head of a legion wielding the nails, Angron reaped many victories during the Great Crusade, although some criticized the extreme and bloodthirsty tactics he used to ensure the destruction of his opponents. At some point following the rediscovery of Angron, Arkan land was brought to a secret laboratory hidden in a dormant volcano within a tundra on Terra, tasked with aiding in the Emperor's investigation of Angron's crude augments while the Primarch lay unconscious. Land had previous experience with the device taking over Angron's body, having seen it when investigating the Hexachron vaults before having them sealed, due to the threat the items within presented to the machine cult. He told the Emperor that it was called a cruciaman, but the versions he saw were more crude. The Emperor explained that the implants were not his doing, and that he believed they led to Angron's instability. He also mentioned that they were recreated to remove the ability to enjoy anything but anger. When asked if the Emperor could remove it, he admitted he could. But the tendrils were deep in Angron's head and spine, and he was missing his limbic lobe and insular cortex. The butcher's nails therefore replaced part of Angron's brain, allowing him to live. The Night of the Wolf. The Emperor himself criticized Angron for the changes he made to his recruits. Like all other gladiators on his homeworld, Angron had received special nerve implants known as the Butcher's Nails, which tremendously heightened his aggressiveness, but also had the side effect of uncontrollable rages outside of battle. Angron ordered his tech marines and apothecaries to duplicate the technology and that all recruits undergo the process that would turn them into aggressive and fearless warriors. Despite the obvious advantages, the Emperor was displeased and ordered him to stop. Angron paid him no heed and continued the unsavory practice secretly. This led to the World Eaters being criticized for their general bloodlust and barbarity by their fellow legionnaires. They were known for blood rituals when not in combat, and competed with each other for the number of enemy heads they could take in battle. Eventually, the Emperor dispatched the Space Wolves and Leman Russ to Malkoya to deal with Angron and demand an end to both the Butcher's Nail surgeries and massacres carried out by the World Eaters. A tense standoff between the wolves and world eaters resulted with all-out warfare, eventually breaking out in a brief but bloody battle. Angron engaged Russ in single combat, defeating Russ but allowing himself to become encircled by Russ bodyguards in the process. Angron failed to understand that his bloodlust and disregard for both his life and his legionnaires had allowed him to become encircled. Disappointed that his brother had not learned this lesson, Russ ordered a retreat. Angron saw this as a victory, for while he would have fallen had Russ gave the order to open fire, he had bested the wolf and the world eaters suffered fewer casualties than their enemies. The Horus Heresy. After this debacle, the Emperor dispatched Horus to bring Angron back in line, which ended up being a fatal error, as Horus was already corrupted by the forces of chaos. Being a master manipulator, he told Angron exactly what he wanted to hear, that the Emperor was a weakling, devoid of honor, and that there was a place for him in a new order, along with revenge against the brother Primarchs that had criticized his legion. Angron needed no further convincing, throwing his legion on Horus's side when the Horus Heresy broke out. During the heresy, Angron would team up in the Shadow Crusade with Lorgar and his word-bearers to strike at Ultramar, in conjunction with the traitor offensive at the Battle of Calth. Angron, seeing Lorgar as a weakling, refused to cooperate with him and frequently wasted time sacking and butchering strategically worthless targets. The tensions between the two Primarchs boiled over into a brutal battle, which was only interrupted by a Dark Eldar attempt to assassinate Angron himself. After the two Primarchs worked together against the Dark Eldar, they put their feud aside. However, Lorgar, recognizing Angron's instability and hidden sorrow over his forced departure from Nuceria, recommended that Angron return to his adopted homeworld to find a sense of closure as well as possibly overcome the Butcher's nails, which were slowly killing him. When the two Primarchs arrived, they discovered that the slave lords of Nuceria had massacred Angron's comrades, and told the population that he had fled during their last stand. Angron ordered that the World Eaters and Word-Bearers purge Nuceria of its population. During the battle against Imperial forces, Angron saved Lorgar by stopping a Warhound Titan's foot with his bare hands before it could stomp on his brother. Later the Ultramarines led by Guilliman arrived, determined to exact vengeance on the traitors for the Battle of Calth. Angron went on to duel Guilliman himself during the battle, defeating the Primarch in a furious rage. While Guilliman managed to escape thanks to an intervention by nearby Ultramarines, this was precisely what Lorgar had wanted, and the Word-Bearers Primarch began a Khornate ritual. Using Angron's rage as a conduit, Lorgar channeled the power of Khorne and surged the Red Angel with the powers of chaos. Angron was transformed into a hulking, even more bloodthirsty, avatar of violence and rage that had overcome the debilitating effects of the Butcher's nails. For his new form, he was given a massive black runes word forged by the Dark Mechanicum. The first words that the newly ascendant Angron spoke were his desire for Khorne to massacre slaves in the lower decks of the Conqueror and build him a skull throne. Angron and his World Eaters went on to mindlessly rampage throughout the galaxy, ignoring Horus's calls to muster at Ullanor in preparation for the drive on Terra. Perturbo himself was eventually sent with orders to bring Angron to Ullanor at all costs. Upon the world of Deluge, the Iron Warriors arrived to find the population butchered and stacked into mountains of corpses. After withstanding an assault by crazed World Eaters and Khornate demons, the sky opened up and Angron himself entered the carnage. Perturbo and Angron engaged in a brutal battle, with the demon having the clear edge in power and speed. However, despite taking many wounds, Perturbo endured and goaded Angron, declaring that he was born a slave and now was a slave to darkness for all eternity. By using the Iron Warriors, Iron Circle, and Vogue to outmaneuver and bombard the World Eaters, Angron was bested as an Ultramarines fleet appeared in orbit over Deluge. Angron laughed and declared that they were all now going to die, but Perturbo reminded the demon Primarch that he had seen his warriors butchered while he had done nothing once before. This moved Angron enough to act, and after creating a warp storm, the Iron Warriors and World Eaters fleets were able to escape the Ultramarines and move to Ullanor, where they accompanied Horus for the muster. Angron subsequently appeared in the climax of the Solar War. As a massive warp rift opened up over Luna, which allowed the primary traitor strike force to assail Terra itself, Angron was seen perched aboard one of the battlements of the Conqueror. By the siege of Terra, Angron was a blood-crazed slave to Khorne. He demanded that Horus allow him to directly attack the Imperial Palace, regardless of the fact that the Emperor's psychic barrier around the world would see him likely die in the process until such a time where the traitors could weaken it. After hearing that Mortarian's Death Guard would instead be the first to assault Terra, Angron fell into a rage and massacred all he came across within the bowels of the Conqueror. Lotara Sarin feared that he would murder the tech priests attending to the vessel's reactor, risking a catastrophic meltdown. This forced Khan to confront Angron within the ship, where the Primarch revealed he knew of the 8th Captain's ultimate destiny and wished to supplant him as the Chosen of Khorne. The two battled, with Khan being little match for his Gene father. However, before Angron could finish him, Khan placed a teleport Homer on the Primarch, which transported him to the shifting maze within the nearby Night Lord's flagship Nightfall. Angron became trapped and spent his time battling the many traps within the maze. Later, when traitor rituals weakened the Emperor's psychic barrier on Terra, Angron was shot out of the Nightfall and into space, where he made his way to the surface. Angron appeared in front of Terra as a flaming meteor, landing and slaying friend and foe alike. He fought his way to the walls of the palace, where he saw Sanguinius and roared a challenge. Sanguinius refused, saluting his brother and stating that while they would battle one day, but today was NT that day. Angron raged, but due to the lingering effects of the Emperor's barrier could not pursue him into the palace. During the battle for the Lion's Gate spaceport, Angron destroyed a capital Imperialis and then a Leviathan, but was again unable to advance past the palace walls. When the Lion's Gate spaceport fell to a massive traitor assault and the Emperor's shield shrunk to only encompass the Sanctum Imperialis, Angron led a horde of World Eaters onto the Eternity Wall. Angron and Khan led an assault on the Eternity Wall spaceport, and in a moment of clarity the Primarch regained some of his old noble visage. He gave an opportunity for the defenders of the spaceport to surrender, though they responded by blasting him to pieces with their gun batteries. Angron quickly regenerated, and along with his World Eaters massacred the defenders of the Eternity Wall spaceport. He later struck down the lone Imperial Army trooper Elanius Piers as the mortal stood before him. Eventually, Horus was slain by the Emperor and the traitors were forced to flee Terra in defeat. Already savage and brutal, the World Eaters quickly found a new master in the form of the blood god Khorne, eternally demanding sacrifice and skulls. Angron led his legion into their worship and oversaw his legion's retreat into the Eye of Terror, the Dominion of Fire. During the middle of the 38th millennium, Angron and 50,000 Khorne berserkers slaughtered their way through Imperial space for over 2 centuries. This incident became known as the Dominion of Fire. The wars and rebellions the forces of Khorne sparked ravaged over 70 sectors. In the end, it took 4 Space Marine chapters, 2 Titan legions and more than 30 Imperial Guard regiments to retake what the Imperium had lost. 90% of the area has since been recovered by the forces of mankind. The First War for Armageddon. In 444.M41, Angron invaded the Imperial hive world of Armageddon. He led 4 World Eaters companies and a demonic host against the local defenders and their Space Wolves allies. Angron's forces ravaged the planet, but he was continually forced to slow his advance to erect monuments to Khorne in order to sustain his demonic form in the Materium. In the end, however, he was defeated when he was confronted by a force of 109 Grey Knights. Angron and his escort of 12 bloodthirsters, the Crua Praetoria, initially decimated the Grey Knights sent before him until a newer recruit, an extraordinarily powerful Psyker, Hyperion, managed to first snap, then break the Black Blade at the height of the struggle. Now at a disadvantage, Angron was banished back to the warp by brother Captain Termar Aurelian in a battle that only 13 Grey Knights survived. Current status. After the formation of the Great Rift, the Salamanders prevented an attempt to summon Angron upon Armageddon.
Thank you for listening to this entry from Warhammer 40,000 Lexicanum.